Welcome back everybody to another episode of our weekly Moto News Update, where this week there's good news for KTM with a huge injection of cash, more detailed spy shots of the hotly anticipated F450GS from BMW, Ducati patent a hot version of their Diavel V4 plus some new tech, and then news from BUELL, electrics from Enfield and Honda, Yamaha's V4 looks like it might debut very soon, and BMW have put out a very tempting looking teaser of what could be the next generation of S1000RR. But the big story of the week that we have to start with is the news that KTM have been saved with a big financing package that's just arrived in the nick of time. You see, they were due to pay back almost 600 million euro this week on Friday as part of an agreement with the administrators after them getting into severe financial difficulties at the back end of last year. This money is to pay off 30% of their debts, with the 70% remaining, or 1.5 billion euro, to be written off. And effectively this means that KTM can remain operational for the foreseeable future. Now, their parent group, Pira Mobility, said on the press area of their website that Pira Mobility AG and KTM AG have received financing commitments subject to the execution of the requisite agreements, which will ensure that the quota payments to fulfill the restructuring plans of KTM can be fulfilled on time by May 23rd, 2025. Now, KTM themselves have just followed up with their own press release confirming that the money came from Bajaj, their manufacturing partners, as suspected, and I should also point out that Bajaj actually own 49.9% of KTM, so it's no huge surprise that they're responsible. And so with this money found and this deadline met, well, does that mean that KTM are finally out of the woods? I'd probably suggest not. You know, they've still got that massive backlog of bikes to clear that stood at 250,000 unsold bikes at the end of last year. There's the production line to get back up and running, which has paused a couple of times in 2025 already. Then you've got the damaged relationships with all their suppliers who they're only paying back 30% of what they owe. And there's the unreleased models that they announced at the back end of last year, like the 1390 Super Adventures, the 1390 Super Duke GT, the new 390s, the 990 Duke R, the 990 RCR sports bike. Yeah, there's quite a lot to get back on with, and I don't believe we're going to see any of those bikes till later this year. So yeah, far from business as usual yet, but in my opinion, it's definitely a good thing they found the money, with hopefully no more job losses in the immediate future, as they've already had to lay off 1,850 people so far since these financial difficulties began. As always though, I'd love to know what you think of the latest news, so do let me know down in the comments below. Now, a quick reminder before we move on to those new spy shots of the F450GS that we're still running our competition with Litelok, which is free to enter, easy to enter, and also open to everybody that watches the channel worldwide. Litelok make these incredible D-locks such as the X3 that we're giving away, which are coated with a special material called baronium, and that makes them 20 times more resistant to an angle grinder attack than a regular non-armored lock. Having your bike stolen or even attempted, I can vouch for firsthand, is a very stressful thing, and so I'm very happy to be giving one of these X3s away, along with, for 3 runners-up, a £100 or €100 voucher. And then for everybody else, we've also got a discount code running which will get you 15 quid off, and that'll be active for the duration of the competition, and I believe a couple of weeks afterwards as well. So look, do check out the links down in the description below where you can find both the competition entry form and the discount code, and once again a massive thanks to Litelok for their support. Now, last week we looked at some early spy shots of the new Baby GS adventure bike from BMW, which is rumoured for release later this year after making its debut at EICMA in November in 2024 with that stunning looking, very off-road biased looking concept bike. And while it was great to see the bike already being put through its paces in the real world with those spy shots last week, well, they weren't necessarily the best view of the bike because it was pretty heavily camouflaged. That's why I was very excited to see this gallery of photos arrive from my regular spy shot source this week, with a bike that looks much closer to completion, and also the pictures weren't taken on what looked like a 1990s camera phone. Anyway, what can we make out from these new shots? Well, again, this appears to be the road bias version with the cast wheels, a 19-inch on the front, a 17 on the rear, and it's kind of interesting that that's the only one that we've seen in spy shots so far, and the only sight of any kind of off-roady aggressive version was that first concept at EICMA and also the official promo video that BMW put out. It's a bit like the marketing materials are more exciting than the actual reality, and so I do hope that two versions will be available. That's what I was led to believe anyway, or at very least some, suspension and wheel upgrades in the accessories catalogue, which is, to be fair, fairly common for BMW. I will say as well, without the camouflage, we can see a bit more of the bodywork. Naturally, the headlight as well looks a lot like its bigger sibling in the R1300GS. But I don't know if it's the cast wheels, maybe the suspension's sitting a little bit lower than the concept. I guess the plain black test finish doesn't help either, but I think this just looks a bit less awesome than the concept bike. They recently discontinued the G310GS, which was a single cylinder powered sort of baby GS. And so one assumes this 450 will become its replacement soon, but it does look a bit like a G310GS, like it looks a bit cheap and small. And so I'm really hoping the final production version, when it's fully painted up, when you spec it up with the right stuff, just retains a bit of that exciting image of the concept bike. I don't know if that's just me though, let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, elsewhere we can see the 450 parallel twin visible clearly there with the twin headers on the exhaust system. You got a single disc up front with a radial 4-pop brake caliper, semi-knobbly adventure-ready tyres, an upside-down fork, a bolt-on subframe, and also some racks for some luggage, which aren't necessarily very neatly integrated like you might get on the bigger GSs, but at least they're there as an option anyway. So yeah, it's looking like they're having to tame back that concept bike a little bit, but I am still excited to see what they come up with, and it still looks like they're going to hit that timeline of later this year for launch. Meanwhile, over at Ducati, well, we're expecting a whole bunch of new bikes to be launched later this year as well, like the V2 versions of their Monster Naked and the Desert X adventure bike, a new R version of the Panigale V4 as well. But on top of those, just this week, it's emerged that there could be a spicy RS version of their already quite spicy Diavel V4 Power Cruiser. This one was spotted by Motorcycle.com in Ducati's recent VIN decoder, which was filed with the US National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, which was also responsible, I think, for leaking some of those other bikes like the V2 Monster and Desert X, the Panigale V4R. And so yeah, potentially a bit of a headache for Ducati, but some probably necessary paperwork. Thing is though, with the Diavel V4, it's already 168 horsepower. It's got top spec Brembo brakes, Öhlins suspension, it's got track levels of tech. And so what can they possibly do to make it go any faster? Well, one idea that's been suggested is to put a Panigale engine in it. You see, the V4 engine that they use in the Diavel is the same as the one that they use in the Multistrada, which is called the V4 Gran Turismo, and it's built for a little bit more practicality by using regular spring-actuated valves as opposed to the high-revving signature Desmo valve system that you get in the V4 in the Panigale. Now, the result is much longer service intervals, but of course, you do sacrifice a bit of top-end power with it not being able to rev out so freely. The Panigale V4 though, the Desmo Sedici Stradale V4, makes 216 horsepower, and so that would be a good nearly 50 extra horsepower if they do make that swap. And so yeah, I think that would make it every bit worthy of the RS suffix, and you probably also expect a bunch of other little changes like a fancy paint job, carbon bodywork, sometimes they do a dry clutch on these sorts of things, billet parts like the fuel cap and the foot controls, and also to finish it off, slap a nice big price tag on it. This one's expected during their run of world premieres at the back end of this year, so hopefully on the market in time for 2026, although I very much doubt many of us will be able to afford one. Now also from Ducati and revealed in some recent patent applications, we've got potentially a new automatic clutch or e-clutch system, and it might be the most performance-biased interpretation of this sort of tech so far. You see, Honda already have an e-clutch on the market with their CB650 Naked and the CBR650R sports bike, which uses an electronic actuator on the clutch so that it can do the clutch on your behalf and you can ride it as a twist and go. Gear shifts though are left to you, they're still manual, so you do that with your left foot, and there is still a manual clutch lever which you can use to override the e-clutch in order to like slip it if you're doing slow speed maneuvers, for example. Now apparently from these pictures which have been picked up by Cycle World, well, the Ducati system does look pretty similar apart from the fact that it uses hydraulics, but the thing that jumped out at me was the fact that they say it will tie into the launch control system and also that it's specifically built for like performance bikes rather than affordable bikes like the Hondas. Now if you've never ridden a bike with launch control, the general idea is you pull in the clutch once you've enabled launch control, give it the beans, just hold the throttle wide open, and then as soon as you dump the clutch, the bike starts to manage the amount of throttle that's been put out because it's all done electronically in order to give you the best possible drive forward. So it'll try and get you off the line as quickly as possible, and the TC's there to stop it, spinning up at the rear. And of course you got wheelie control to stop it flipping over backwards. And hopefully with all those things working together, it goes pretty flipping fast. With an auto clutch involved though, well, I guess that's another variable for the bike to play with. And as for how that will translate into the sort of launch control experience, well, I assume you put it into gear, you don't need to touch the clutch because the bike can hold it in, and you just give it the throttle and then maybe hit a button or something like that to set off. Sounds like it could be pretty flipping nuts, but I for one would be willing to give it a go in the name of important motorcycle journalism, so expect this one in a Panigale soon, or maybe that Diavel V4 RS. If, however, you're looking for another option when it comes to a crazy cruiser, then it could well be the new BUELL Super Cruiser, which they've been working on for some time now. Basically, it's a stripped back, lean chassis, but with their big V-twin at the heart of it, and it gets sporty suspension, sporty brakes, and 17-inch rims at both ends, shod with some sticky rubber. Now, it's not necessarily, as far as I'm aware anyway, a combination that many people have been asking for, but all the same, it does look like it could be a heck of a hoot to ride. Now, I think we've covered the specs of it in more detail in the past, but recently they've announced the sort of latest development is that it'll be properly released in autumn this year with a price tag of $25,900, and they've actually opened pre-orders on the BUELL website with a $1,000 deposit required. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, then it's probably time to get your order in. And on top of that though, the other bike that BUELL have been developing recently is their new Super Tourer, which I would say is a very odd looking thing, but again, it does sound like, at least on paper, that it should be an absolute blast on the road. This one also gets their 1190 V-twin, but this time it makes 185 horsepower, which is I think 10 or 15 horsepower up on the Super Cruiser, and it also gets their signature fuel-in frame design with this aluminium chassis, a pretty flashy looking spec with components from Brembo and Fox, and BUELL say it's enough to make it the world's fastest production touring motorcycle, and it comes in a little bit cheaper than the Super Tourer at $23,995. Now again, this one is coming in autumn this year, so that's the big announcement. These bikes will be available and start shipping, and it does look like it could be ridiculously quick. I'm just not sold with this one on the looks with that big pair of headlights at the front. Is it cool and different, or is it just a bit difficult to look at? Let me know what you think of it in the comments. Now, we've delved plenty recently into the troubles at Harley-Davidson with a slow year for selling bikes in 2024, unhappy shareholders as a result, and a campaign to oust the current CEO who's retiring soon anyway. It's all been a bit of a mess for the past couple of months, but one of the big problems, I think, is their LiveWire electric brand, which consistently seems to lose money year in, year out. And so it became one of the targets of that campaign to kick him out, with shareholders feeling like it's a step in the wrong direction. Just this last week, though, said CEO Jochen Zeitz revealed why he thinks LiveWire has been struggling, with a quote from their company-wide earnings call, apparently putting the blame on charging infrastructure, with him saying, "We very much rely on the development of automotive charging stations." Now, perhaps to some extent he's right. It would be better if there were more places to charge. It's certainly something that I found annoying when I have reviewed electric motorcycles. But Ride Apart point out in their article, which is worth the read if you want a bit more depth on this problem, that there are probably plenty of other contributing factors to the fact that they only sold 33 bikes in total across the world in the first quarter of this year. And the first one is perhaps the price. Maybe if the first LiveWire they launched wasn't $29,799, then more people might have given it a thought. It's not just LiveWire though, to be fair. Bennett's Bike Social put out every week or two an excellent roundup of the best discount deals in the UK on bikes, and one that jumped out at me from their most recent roundup was the Zero SRS Tourer. Now it's another bike that's too expensive in my opinion at £23,995 as it's normally listed, but Wheels Motorcycle in the UK are offering it with £9,996 off, and so that makes it just shy of 14 grand, which I think is potentially a lot more competitive with similarly spec'd petrol-powered bikes. Clearly, with those sorts of discounts, dealers are really struggling to shift them, but that hasn't deterred Royal Enfield, who are pushing forward with their electric flying flea. Now, this one was first shown as well at EICMA last year, and while there was no clear timeline at the launch, well, their CEO has just gone on record as saying it'll be Q4 of the fiscal year in 2026. So yeah, that translates to some point in the first 3 months of next year. And so if you like the idea of an electric that's a bit more affordable, if not that quick, and also has a little bit of retro charm to the design, then this one might be one to look out for. Question is though, will it buck the trend for electrics and become the first electric motorcycle sales hit for a major motorcycle manufacturer? Because as far as I can tell, they've all been pretty poor so far. Well, I think it's got a better chance. Electrics are much better in the city where range is less of an issue, charging opportunities are more frequent, and this bike, the Flying Flea, looks like it's been built almost entirely with city riding in mind, and so for this one, I'd give it a bit more of a chance. That said, over at Honda, they're making a push towards electric too. They've set some kind of crazy goal of launching 10 electric two-wheelers by 2025, and that includes, along with, a few scooters and whatnot, some built specifically for recreational riding on the open road. Now, Visor Down report that they've just unveiled an electric sports bike concept at the Beijing Motor Show, which follows on from the EV Fun Naked that they launched a couple of months ago. It does look kind of similar to the EV Fun, it's got some of the same shapes, but this one gets a bit more of a fairing and also a disc wheel at the rear for an extra sporty look. If this is all a bit sterile for your taste though, we've got a couple of updates on perhaps more exciting petrol-based propulsion for you, starting with Yamaha's new V4 engine that they're building in order to become more competitive in MotoGP. It's been known that they've been working on this for a while now, but Ride Apart report this week that it could be due sooner rather than later. Yamaha's motorsport director Paolo Pavezio recently stated that we want to make a wildcard entry this year, and as soon as possible, the sooner we can do this test at a GP weekend, the faster we'll progress with development. However, I can rule out the possibility of us competing with the V4 bike before the summer break, but I hope we can get going soon after the summer break. So look, potentially for next season, although like I've said in the past, there's no word on whether this one would ever make it into a production motorcycle, which is more so what I'm concerned with, as we don't really cover, the sporting side of biking on this channel. Still, you gotta think with their MT10 Naked and the R1 sports bike both being fairly recently discontinued, at least in the UK and Europe, because of increasingly strict emissions regulations, there's got to be an ever so slight chance that there'll be a V4 replacement for each at some point. Rounding off though, we've got a new teaser from BMW, who've been very busy announcing new models this year, and this next one could potentially be, eventually anyway, the biggest of them all. It is a rather dark and shadowy Instagram post that shows off just the outline of the top of the bike, but you can tell quite clearly that it's a sports bike, and it looks to be a fairly serious one at that, and so one can assume that this might well be the start of the journey towards a replacement or a major update for their S1000RR sports bike. The caption reads, "Catch a glimpse of the future as a new concept bike is unveiled on the 23rd of May at 7 p.m. CEST. We'll, of course, be covering that one in full detail as soon as we get all the info, so do hit subscribe if you want all the latest motorcycle news and reviews right here on MOTOBOB. I'll put last week's episode on the screen now in case you missed it, so you can give that a click and give it a watch. A massive thanks as always for watching, and hopefully we'll see you in the next video.